Today it's time to talk about the future, especially seeing as next year we'll have hoverboards and flying cars. Recently, I had an interesting conversation about games, but not just about games we have played, it was about what would happen in the future of gaming. You see, games have to change, they have to evolve with the times. The games of 30 years ago would not survive today. You see, it has become apparent that the games of today, such as Call of Duty and Battlefield, are beginning to die. How have I determined this, you ask? Well, I've spoken to some hardcore fans of the two series lately, and all of them have not only gotten bored of the same old formula, but they also just didn't like the new games. The words I've heard time and time again over the past few weeks are simply, it's basically the same game that I've been playing for the past 10 years. So this begs the question, what will games be like in years to come? Well, I've decided that this is a big topic, and it's a little too big to cover in one episode. So I've instead decided to split it into 3 episodes, each one covering a different style of game that chances are will be focused on the future of gaming. Today, we will be looking at realism. Over the past few years, some of the most popular games have been those that are realistic in some way, such as the previously mentioned military shooters. However, players of these games have migrated to more realistic games such as the Arma, Operation Flashpoint and DayZ series, which feature more realistic gameplay. However, a good question is why these games are made. This is because the audience is there, and as a publisher or developer it is easy to say, let's make a game for a pre-existing audience. And the biggest reason companies like this sit there and make these kinds of games rather than taking risks and developing more out there and crazy games is because, well, it's because of piracy. The thing is, only a third of games that are actually downloaded are bought. However, the very people who pirate these games are the ones telling game developers to get creative. And as a developer, I have to say it's rather hard to trust an audience who is pirating my games. I would rather stay right here and make shitty AAA titles than take the plunge and appeal to an audience that's currently downloading my games without paying me. Anyway, now that we have covered why the industry is curving in this direction, let's cover how to make a realistic game. After all, these games need to become more realistic in order to survive, so perhaps I can give out a few tips on making them better. The first part is graphics. I've already covered how graphics are important to create immersion in my previous episode, so let's jump in. Graphics can be broken down into 4 components. These are the lighting, resolution, visual effects, and the textures and models. Lighting is the simulation of how light affects an environment. Resolution is the total number of pixels that your game displays. Essentially, it's the amount of dots that the game shows on your screen of the game itself, and having a screen that is bigger than the game's resolution means that these dots become stretched and one dot may display across multiple dots. Visual effects are all kind of eye candy, used to make the game look fancy, and are often used to cover the shortcomings of the other graphical elements. Textures and models make up the game's objects. Textures allow you to add details to and color in models, while models are the objects within the game themselves. The first thing we can do is dismiss most of the visual effects. There are some of these which allow for making the graphics look fancy and can cheaply cover the shortcomings of other graphical elements. However, visual effects should not be focused on as heavily as the other graphical elements. The next thing we can do is place resolution a tad bit lower on our list of priorities. While our eyes as humans do allow us to count grains of sand, we have watched 720 and even 480p TV for a long time and we were not bothered by it. Naturally, this is definitely a good place to spend any extra performance if you have the power, as is one of the visual effects known as anti-aliasing, which does a good job at hiding lower resolutions and even helps when you've got high ones instead. This leaves lighting, models, and textures. Lighting should be the biggest focus when making a game look realistic. This is gameplay of Minecraft with a good shader pack. This is without it. Both of them contain the same textures, models, and other visual effects. The shader pack, however, simply changes the lighting, in this case affecting the accuracy of shadows and the colors of the lights. You see, in reality, you can literally have objects that have little textural detail and a very small number of faces. These objects still look real, however, because of the way the light hits them and reflects off them. Hence, making a realistic game rides almost entirely off the quality of your lighting engine and the materials you set each object to. And even if your game isn't meant to be realistic, realistic lighting definitely makes it look better. This brings us to the final focus of realistic graphics: textures and models. Essentially, the detail of textures and models should really be balanced. Having more complex textures can allow you to make a model look more detailed, while also allowing you to add details and images to an object. A higher detailed model means more complex shapes, and no amount of textures can turn a cube into a person. This is why it's important to balance the two. Especially considering that, sure, textures can turn a cube into a bumpy cube, but they definitely can't turn it into a person. That's still not going to happen. Considering that models and textures are what make up objects within your games, it pays to make them look good. However, when it comes to making things look realistic, lighting is definitely the first thing to look at. This covers graphics, however there are three main other elements to a game, those being gameplay, story, and sound. Realistic sound is not hard to achieve. Simply by recording or recreating real sounds, we can meet this quality. Hey, here's a little note. You know, sheaths in games such as Skyrim, well, they don't actually make a shing noise when you pull your sword out of it. In reality, they're usually made out of leather, and it would be a really big disadvantage if they did make a shing and they were made out of metal. Anyway, back to story and sound. Story is something that is not hard to do. A good story is a believable one, and even if the story is set in a fantastical universe or contains fantasy elements, it can still be realistic if it is believable enough. The key to this is consistency, making characters that are fleshed out, that the author understands, as well as concepts that are constant and unwavering. Basically, each character and object must have solid rules surrounding them. In a similar way, realistic gameplay consists of taking rules from reality and implementing them into games. Things like if you get slashed by a sword, your arm gets cut off, or if you get shot in the head, your skull breaks. Previously, this was not possible to achieve due to the lack of processing power that consoles and computers had. However, as we enter the 8th console generation, this power is there, and all we need now is people with the guts to implement it. Naturally, realistic gameplay doesn't always mean more fun, or easy gameplay, but chances are we will see it in the future because realistic gameplay means immersion, which, as I mentioned last episode, is a really big deal. When all these elements are combined, we are only scratching the surface of the realism that games can achieve. To delve deeper, we need to mimic realism with the game's very input and output. The Oculus Rift is a brilliant example of virtual reality. It allows you to immerse yourself in the game's graphics and sound. However, paired with today's input system, it suffers, sometimes causing nausea and motion sickness. However, what if there was a system that allowed you to imagine your character doing something and they would do it? Well, there is one, and it's called the Brain-Computer Interface. This piece of kit detects the radiation caused by your thinking. Not nuclear radiation, just radiation. However, the problem with it is that background thoughts can have an effect on the radiation caused by the brain, and while different thoughts are processed by different parts of the brain and different sensors are used to access each part, the device is still rather primitive. But like I said at the start of the video, what's going to happen in the future? Will we be able to put on a headset and play games as though we were literally in the game world? Will games work by inducing a dream state on the player? Will we all be walking around with little chips in our heads that we use to game, bank, and work in the future? And is that really going to be a good thing if we do? It's hard to say. This show is usually about making observations and certainly not about making theories, but it is definitely something to think about. Anyway guys, that's the end of the episode, and before I go, I would just like to say a couple of words. Firstly, these videos are really hard to make, so I would love it if you would continue supporting me, give me feedback, like the video and share it around, so that as many people can see it and tell me what to do better as much as possible. But there's something a bit more important that I want to talk about other than just me and my videos, and that is I would like to bring your attention to cancer. I would love it if you were to just do ongoing support for cancer research, because it feels to me a bit like whenever a celebrity dies from cancer, a ton of donations are made and we make some progress, but then it just kind of fades off and no one really cares anymore, and that's not exactly what I would like to happen. I feel that if we were to donate, each and every one of us, for the next 10 years, we could seriously knock this thing over, but until then, we're kind of in a tough spot. Anyway, that is all from me now. See you next time. Have fun.